Good evening and welcome. For the next 60 minutes, you're going to sit back and enjoy a look back at some of the greatest moments during the Bill Polian years with the Buffalo Bills. We'll talk about everything from the signing of Jim Kelly to the first AFC East Championship, of course, Super Bowl 25. We'll talk about all the great memories that made the Buffalo Bills one of the most successful franchises in NFL history. And we'll be back with the man himself, Bill Polian, right after these messages right here on the Empire Sports Network. Welcome back, and Bill, first of all, I want to say this is it's going to be a pleasure because we've sat, we've talked, we've chatted a lot over the years about some great moments with the Buffalo Bills. I think regardless of whatever you do and what I'm sure will be a long career, you'll always be known in Western New York for your affiliation with the Bills. I know you still refer to them as we and us at times. So let's take you back a bit. Many people maybe don't dwell on the fact that prior to you becoming general manager, then general manager Terry Bledsoe was ill. It was in ill health. You were very much involved in the selection of Bruce Smith as the then #1 draft pick in all of the NFL. I remember this very well because I remember taking a trip down to Virginia Tech to talk to Bruce before he was even signed by the Buffalo Bills. Why don't we use that as an origin here because I think the addition and the addition of Bruce to the defense, he became a very dominant player, and it was really, I know, a selling point to some people to make Bruce Smith the #1 guy because there was another guy coming out that year by the name of Doug Flutie, who was a very attractive quarterback at the time.
That's right. Right now, you look back on it, and it seems ludicrous that you would consider Doug Flutie as the first player in the draft. But at the time, coming off a 2-14 season, there was great pressure in the media particularly and in the newspaper particularly, polls and columns and what have you, to make Doug Flutie the #1 choice in the draft. But Kay Stevenson, who was took the first step in rebuilding the Bills into a champion, saw very clearly that Bruce Smith was the best player. The choice came down to Bruce Smith and Ray Childress, oddly enough. And Ray, of course, has gone on to have a great career and been a thorn in the Bills' side every time we've played. And we decided, however, that because Bruce was an outside player, an end, and Ray, of course, has become an all-pro tackle and probably will be in the Hall of Fame as well, we decided that Bruce would be the guy. And then had to go about signing him. And just as the signing process was beginning and the competition with the then Baltimore Stars of the United States Football League was beginning, Terry Bledsoe unfortunately suffered a heart attack. And so Dave Olson, who was then the treasurer of the Bills, tapped me to step in and join with him in the signing of Bruce because, of course, I'd had signing experience both here with the Bills and in the USFL.
Mm-hmm. Now, my question, I guess, is at the time, not very many people had bought season tickets for the Buffalo Bills. It's come off very tough, a series of tough years. How could you convince the money people? Doug Flutie obviously would have put a lot of people in the stands. Bruce Smith was a relative unknown in Western New York, and very few defensive players in the history of the league have been the type of guy to sell tickets. How'd you convince the money guys, or how did the powers that be at One Bills Drive convince money guys that Doug Flutie wasn't their man?
Well, it was apparent very early on that Bruce was the best player, and Kay at the time echoed a theme that you've heard me restate over and over the years. If you're going to win, we have to have a dominant defense, and it starts with pass rush, and therefore Bruce Smith. We felt that Doug would be an outstanding Canadian League quarterback, which he turned out to be, but that he was not the guy to build the resurgence of the franchise around. Plus, we had the rights to Jim Kelly at the time. He had been drafted the year before in a stroke of genius, and so our quarterback of the future was already there. The question was how are we going to get the defense better, and that translated to Bruce Smith.
And like anything else, it was a little roll of the dice because there was no guarantee that Kelly would ever end up at that time in a Bills uniform.
Oh no, there wasn't, and in fact, over time, we talked about a number of different scenarios involving trades for the rights. In fact, right up to my first draft as general manager, we talked about trades for the rights. But Mr. Wilson, to his great credit, was adamant all the way through that we were going to sign Jim Kelly.
A couple other signees during that time, free agents from the USFL. Kent Hull, who went on to become one of the greatest centers in the history of the franchise, Ray Bentley, who was an outstanding linebacker for a time, Scott Norwood, who won a couple of games for the Bills, and Mark Kelso. Many people wonder, where did Mark Kelso come from? These guys were all signed as free agents during that time.
Yes, they were. The USFL was about to fold up. Many players whose contracts had expired were becoming free agents and looking to go to the NFL. And of course, I had the good fortune to work in the USFL with the Chicago Blitz, and so I knew virtually all of the personnel in the league. Kent, Ray, and Scott had played in the USFL. Scotty, as a matter of fact, I think led the league in scoring one year. Marv and I had discovered in a scouting combine and a subsequent scouting trip to William & Mary College, he wasn't well known. The Eagles drafted him in the 10th round, and he lasted until the last cut with the Eagles. And then all during that off season, we pursued him, and really Hank Bulla did a magnificent job recruiting Mark and letting him know that he had a future with the Bills, and certainly he has. He's had a great one. But those four players obviously were great additions. They joined Andre and Frank and others in becoming the building blocks which led to a championship.
On December 30th, 1985, you were named general manager of the Buffalo Bills, and I know a lot of people, their eyebrows were raised at the time because they weren't really familiar with who you were. I'm sure many may have thought maybe Ralph should have grabbed some big-name guy from around the league and brought him in to really fix this franchise. The franchise was in rough shape. Tell us now, what happened behind the scenes, Bill? How did you become the #1 candidate for that job?
Well, I'm not sure I was the #1 candidate. I have a feeling, although he won't admit it, I think Jim Finks might have been. I've ribbed him about it over the years. But in any event, I had worked closely with Dave Olson, a little bit with Ralph through the signing of Bruce, through that subsequent 1985 draft, replacing or standing in for Terry, I should say, not replacing him. And when the choice was to be made of a new general manager, I guess that I was the guy out there that they knew, if not publicly known, at least well known within the franchise as someone that had done these kinds of general manager type jobs, and they'd seen me in action. And absent someone with a bigger reputation, which meant almost anybody, I guess they kind of looked around and said, well, there's a guy over here, let's give him a try.
You're looking over your resume, you've been involved in so many areas of football, which probably added to your success as general manager because you brushed on areas, even spent a time working in the media, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, I was on the sales side in a publishing business, yeah. And no, you're absolutely right. I was very much ready. Most people obviously were shocked by the appointment, and I even joked about it, introducing myself at the first press conference as Bill Who. But I was well prepared for the job. I'd studied and learned well from Jim Schaaf at Kansas City, who really began to steer me down the path toward management when I was a scout there, and his experience and his tutoring was invaluable. I'd had the business experience, so I understood the business side and the financial side of the business. I'd done the job, so to speak, in both the Canadian Football League and then later with the Chicago Blitz as the team unfortunately was folding up. But then as Eddie Einhorn, who owns, among other things, the Chicago White Sox, took the team over, he then tabbed me to be the general manager. I elected not to take the position but to come here with Kay as the pro personnel director. But I had the experience and was ready for the job. So from my perspective, I wasn't frightened of it. I thought I was ready and could do the job. The situation was a little frightening. But, the old saying, if the job was a good one, it wouldn't be open.
When we come back, we'll talk to Bill Polian about the signing of quarterback Jim Kelly right after these messages here on the Empire Sports Network. Welcome back to our Empire Studios. With us, Bill Polian, the man who is known, I know, for building the Buffalo Bills. Bill, you've always been somewhat humble about it. A lot of people were involved. But if you look back, I know, to a moment that maybe was a big turnaround for this franchise, definitely was a big turnaround for the franchise, was the signing of quarterback Jim Kelly, an area that I'm very familiar with because at the time, working at WKBW-TV, I was kind of assigned to the case, and I think at times much to Jim's chagrin, because I was always the guy on the phone, and we were ringing your phone quite a bit because the USFL had basically, in a nutshell, had disbanded. I know Jim had done plenty of interviews talking about how he did not want to come to Buffalo. If the NFL was an option, the Raiders was a team he mentioned quite a bit, and of course the Pittsburgh Steelers, which was his hometown team. So now here is new general manager Bill Polian. You've not only got to sign this guy, you've got to do a sell job that the Buffalo Bills are where he wants to play. Tell us how that came about.
Well, as the USFL came to a conclusion, I got a call from Greg Lustig, who was Jim's agent. We were free at that point to speak with him. He'd gone to New York, I think, because technically he belonged to Donald Trump and the New York team in the USFL. And his agent said, you have permission to speak with him, but you're going to have to recruit him. He doesn't want to come to Buffalo. And to be very honest with you, I was a little put off by that. I said, I don't know that I need to recruit him to come to the National Football League and pay him what was then a king's ransom. And his agent said, no, you better do that because he doesn't want to play with Buffalo. Of course, I'd heard all of the stories about his not wanting to come and what have you. But I said, well, okay, if that's the way you feel, that's what we'll do. So I went to New York City and I met with Jim in a hotel room, he and I. And the agents were there, but principally was he and I. And we talked about essentially what Kay Stevenson had done to build the team with Jim in mind. And basically I told him that we'd acquired Will Wolford and Ronnie Harmon and Andre Reed and others, Chris Burkett, with the idea that he was going to be the quarterback, that we were going to have an offense that would be explosive, that would move the ball, that he was going to have some people he could throw to. And that we were committed to winning, that we were committed to being a champion. And he said, well, in a nutshell, he said, well, based on that, let's go ahead and talk contract. So the following week, we went down to Houston, and through a 2-day period, Dave Olson and myself, along with his agents, were able to hammer out a contract, and which today seems like nickels and dimes, but was then, I think, the highest contract for a quarterback in the National Football League. And he came here, and quite honestly, no one, least of all myself and Jim, realized the kind of reception that he was going to receive. I said to him as we, in our first meeting and subsequently, Buffalo is football town USA. I mean, I said, you don't understand what the Bills mean in Buffalo. Let me explain it to you. Mm-hmm. And then as we flew up on the airplane, I repeated again to him, I said, you're going to be met here with a reception the likes of which you've never seen, because you're the conquering hero. You're the person that's going to lead this team out of the wilderness, and the people know that. And we got on the ground, and neither of us, I think, could comprehend what had happened. I mean, the people standing on the overhangs on the expressway as we drove down to the Hilton, the crowds at the airport, all over town. It was as though a black cloud had been lifted from the franchise and from Buffalo, because they're one and the same. It was the dawn of a new day for the Bills. And although this team is truly that, it may be the last great 47-man team, I believe, in professional football, if there was a capstone event that turned everything around, it was the signing of Jim Kelly.
I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think if Jim Kelly had come when he was drafted, it would have affected the future of Kay Stevenson?
I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think there's any question about that. Jimmy's failure to come here in the first instance was a downer. It cast a pall over the town, over the franchise. There were people, and I know you know this because we've spoken about it many times in dealing with folks around town. I mean, you knew it. People believed this franchise was doomed. That it was doomed to failure, that it was going to move, that it would never win, it couldn't succeed. Somehow or other, it was destined to be a last-place team forever. And the fact that Jim Kelly wouldn't come was the final nail in the coffin. And I can recall, before I became general manager, letters to the editor in the newspaper saying, let it go, let the team go, it'll never win, we're better off without them. That kind of defeatist attitude would never have been there had Jimmy come in the first place. And Kay might still be the coach. Which
brings me to my next question, and that is the arrival of Marv Levy, who replaced Hank Bulla. And I remember speaking to Marv right after the very first game he coached with the Buffalo Bills, which was against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I remember speaking to him with Rick Azar, and Rick and Marv were broadcast buddies, so he was rather candid and kind of shook his head because he said he really didn't realize how bad the team was. So he stood there on the sidelines during a game that the Bills had won in a windstorm against the Steelers, and he saw how much work had to be done. You go way back with Marv Levy. How did his arrival in Buffalo take place?
Well, Mr. Wilson had decided he wanted to make a change. And I said to him, if you're going to make a change, I think that Marv Levy would be the appropriate person. I mentioned two other names. Both men are now head coaches in the National Football League. But I quite honestly said, I think Marv Levy is the right man for the job because he's been through this before. He's resuscitated franchises before in Montreal and in Kansas City. Despite the fact that he was let go in Kansas City, they had the first winning season in 20 years under Marv, and we're headed in the right direction. Unfortunately, the strike season came along. So he'd done it before. He'd been a head coach before. There was no problem with organization, attracting assistants, any of that kind of thing. There'd be no break-in learning curve for him. And most importantly to me, he was the greatest teacher and is the greatest teacher I've ever been around. And when we had good personnel, or at least the beginnings of good personnel, but they had to learn how to be pros and they had to learn how to win. And I was absolutely convinced that Marv Levy was the man to do that.
We'll be back with more with Bill Polian. We'll talk further about Coach Marv Levy and talk about the three-way trade that brought Cornelius Bennett to the Buffalo Bills. We'll be back right after this. With us now, Bill Polian, the architect for the current crop of Buffalo Bills. Bill, Marv Levy, you have often credited for the man who, and many times have deflected the praise from yourself towards Marv and what he did with this team. When he first came in with the Buffalo Bills, let's pick it up with his first full season because, as I say, he picked up in midstream with Hank Bulla, and then he later put his system into place. What was the first thing that he really sat and talked to you about that he needed to change with his football team?
Well, we sat down, I believe it was after the Miami game in his first year, and it may have been the week following the Pittsburgh game. I don't quite recall the positioning of the games. But we had a 23-zip lead over Miami at the half and blew the lead, and I think ended up losing 31-27 or 31-23. And we came in after the game, and I had long since been conditioned to make excuses by that time because I'd been through the 2-14s and now this one. And I said, if only this and if only that, and maybe if the ball had bounced for us and if we hadn't gotten that penalty. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, we're just not good enough. It brought me back to reality. And really from that day forward, we began planning the type of personnel acquisitions which started with the draft of '87 and which ended up being the team that went to 3 straight Super Bowls. And we just began to fill gaps one at a time, or 2 at a time, as the case may be. He made it very clear that he wanted to be aggressive, that we didn't want to wait 5 years to get this done. He said that in his opening press conference, and we carried that through. And the other thing that he made clear was that we were going to do it our way, which was to bring in players that we felt had the right football temperament. Those were the kinds of things. I had already known that. I had already been raised in football and that philosophy, but he was communicating it to others in the organization, really right from the start of that first season on.
Speaking of players with football temperament, '87, first in the draft you bring in Shane Conlon, who becomes a Pro Bowler, Nate Odoms, who eventually became a Pro Bowler, and Leon Seals, who added quite a bit to the Buffalo Bills, an integral part of the team that went to the Super Bowl 25. And then after that, a linebacker by the name of Cornelius Bennett, who basically refused to sign with the Indianapolis Colts, You put together a deal with the Rams and the Colts to bring Bennett to Buffalo, and of course, he has been a yearly Pro Bowler. Where were the seeds planted for the trade to bring Bennett to Buffalo?
On the morning of the draft, at about 7:30 on the morning of the draft, I called Jimmy Irsay and said, name your price for the first pick, because we knew it was going to be Cornelius. And he said, it's going to be Cornelius, and we're not trading the pick. And I said, okay, if you change your mind anytime up until the time you make the pick, get back to me, because we want to, price is no object. And he said, fine, but don't count on it. I called him about 11:30. The draft was to begin around noon, because we had the deal on the table with Houston, which caused us to trade down, still get Shane, and then get an extra pick, which became Nate Odoms. Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken, Jamie Mueller might have come in that same draft, and also Jeff Wright. I may have the years wrong, but I think that draft was a seminal draft for us. In any event, Cornelius was taken by the Colts, and they came to loggerheads on signing. And we fast forward to the trading deadline, which was the 6th weekend of the season, early in October. And of course, that was a strike season too, so we had all of the machinations of replacement football in between, and which made the 2-14 Bills look like world beaters. but Bob Ferguson, who was then our director of pro personnel, came to me on Thursday. He said the word's all around the league that they're going to trade Cornelius. And my first reaction was, well, heck, they'd never trade him in the division, and I doubt that they'll trade him in the conference. And I said, but get on the phones, and I'll do the same and see what information we can come up with. So we met again on about 4 o'clock on Thursday, and Bob said, the word is that Dickerson is part of this deal. So I said, well, let me call the Colts and see what's up. So I called Jimmy, and I got his assistant, Bob Turpening, and he said, well, it's true that we're going to trade him. It's unlikely we'll trade him in the conference, much less the division. But, if we have interest in trading him to you, we'll get back to you. So I sort of mentioned it offhandedly to Marv, and he said, boy, Cornelius Bennett, he would be great to have. I said, well, don't count on it, because it's a long shot. I think I may have informed Mr. Wilson as well, and I'm sure I did, but with the same caveat, don't count on it. It's a long shot. The following morning, at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, Ron Meyer called, the coach of the Colts called Marv, and Jimmy Irsay called me, and it was essentially with the message that if you want in, it'll take a 1 to open. So I just said, we're in. That began a day of negotiations, which ended about 3 o'clock the following morning, Saturday morning, and culminated in our receiving Cornelius in return for 2 1s and a 2, and Greg Bell. In addition to that, the Rams got an additional 2 1s and a 2 from the Colts for Dickerson. So the Rams ended up with a bunch of picks, none of which, amazingly enough, have ever turned into All-Pros. And Greg Bell and another player from the Colts, and the Colts got Dickerson, and we got Cornelius. We were able to sign him. Again, Mr. Wilson was very generous and very supportive in going with what was then the highest contract for a linebacker in the National Football League. But of course, it's been repaid many times over, and Cornelius came in, and of course, I think everyone remembers the story. Marvin Walt said, well, we don't know if we can get him in for a couple weeks here yet, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before he learns our system. And the following week, he was out at practice, and on Wednesday, he sort of went through the motions, feeling his way. On Thursday, he began to feel very comfortable with it. On Friday, he got in a pass rush drill and nearly decapitated Jim. Everyone was going, where did he come from? And of course, we got him in the game against Denver, and he had a couple of sacks and caused John Elway to take a timeout, and the rest, as they say, is history.
When we come back, we'll talk about the 1988 Cinderella Bills right after this on the Empire Sports Network. Welcome back to Empire Studios. Bill Polian, our guest, as we sit and reminisce about the great moments of the Buffalo Bills. 1988, I referred to it as the Cinderella Bills because, as you said, many people thought this franchise was cursed. Yet that team put together a 12-4 record and made it to the AFC Championship game against the Cincinnati Bengals, and this town was just afire.
Oh, it was. It's been a great ride, obviously, but from the end of '87 on, from the coming of Cornelius, where that team really began to come together, we could see it. We knew we were on our way. I think the fans began to see it. We had a chance even to make the playoffs late in the season and didn't perform very well. We lost here against the Patriots and then on the road against Philadelphia to finish the season. But we could see that that Marv's system was beginning to sink in, that it was coming together, that they were becoming pros, and we had high hopes for '88. But I don't think the vast majority of fans felt that we were quite ready to go as far as we did. But that was a magnificent season. In many ways, that and Super Bowl 25, the first Super Bowl, are the most memorable ones for me. I guess because there was so much unrestrained joy the first time. It was just so wonderful to see a whole town, a whole area take such pride in what we accomplished. And that's something that's unique about this franchise. Every time a Buffalo Bill goes out on the field, and you hear this not only from me and Marv, but the players as well, you know that you just don't represent yourself or your teammates or your family. You represent close to 2 million people who live and die with this team, and that's what the 12th man's all about, and that was a remarkable season.
'88 was the addition of Thurman Thomas as running back, steal in the second round, looking back on it, and as you do look back, there was no way of knowing that a rookie running back was going to contribute as quickly as he did with the Bills.
Well, you always think that a running back is the position that can contribute most quickly. And that's why we didn't address that need dramatically in the draft previously. We felt that defense was the premium there because it takes longer for those players to develop. We were very lucky. Early in February, I thought there might be a chance because of the injury that Thurman might fall through. And I talked with Dick Weiss, our team physician, and said to him, would you mind bringing him in? He may fall through. This may be the one guy every year who comes tumbling down that you don't expect. Would you bring him in and take a look at him, take a look at that knee? And he did. And he did a religious study of it and said, he's okay. I think we can take a chance that this thing will hold up. But ultimately, it was Mr. Wilson who had to make the decision. And I can recall in his office just before we were getting ready to make the pick. We're about 4 picks away, and it looked like we were praying, actually, that Thurman would be there. And I laid out the medical situation. I laid out his history, of course, which had been tremendous. Marv talked about his work habits and his ability to practice after the injury had taken place and what have you. And I said to Mr. Wilson, it's your money. You got to give the okay on this. And he said, oh, heck, everything's a gamble. Go ahead and take it. and that's indicative of the kind of support that he gave us throughout. And of course, again, we got very lucky. Thurman came in and as of now, I guess, is the all-time leader in the National Football League in all-purpose yardage, and in my opinion belongs in the Hall of Fame.
You defeated Houston in the playoffs here at Rich Stadium. You're just one game away from the Super Bowl. I know people collectively were pinching themselves in Buffalo. They couldn't believe it was that close. But yet, as you discovered against the Bengals, the team wasn't quite there yet. And after that loss, and players talk about how close they've come to the big game and how you may never get that close again, what was the thinking afterwards? It was a feeling that this is a young team, will have many trips to this game?
Yeah, I think so. There was the feeling that we've come a long way. There's still work to do. I'm a firm believer that flawed teams don't reach the championship in any sport, really. But most importantly, in the National Football League, flawed teams don't sneak in there. Dark horses don't come running through the playoffs and make it all the way to the Super Bowl. And we weren't going to that year. And we weren't a complete defensive team. We weren't really a complete offensive team at that point in time. We hadn't really established an offensive identity, and we weren't ready, I think, to take the last step. In many respects, '88 was a wonderful year because it brought us onto the national scene. It made people here deliriously happy. It made us a solid, productive, competitive franchise. We went from being a pretender to a contender. And then in '89, we took some steps backward, largely because of injury, but that was a great learning experience too, and became the springboard for what we did in the future.
In '89, the team learned that winning's a double-edged sword, and that the pressures that come with it have its drawbacks as well.
No question, no question. Although I think all the media hype was tremendously overblown, and largely due to the focus of one particular organ of the media. But nevertheless, it's a burr under your saddle, and it's something that we had to deal with. But because of Marv's great ability to put things in focus for the team, they were able to put it behind them and overcome it, and go on to the great heights that we've achieved since.
When we come back, we'll talk more about the '89 Bills and 1990, the team that made it to Super Bowl 25. We'll be back right after this. Back with Bill Polian, and now we get to the juicy stuff. And, maybe because Buffalo or the Bills begins with a B, bickering Bills was an easy catchphrase. And the herd mentality of the media guys, Bill. It was an easy pick. It was an easy pick. But now I want you to be candid. I want you to tell me the truth behind what happened, because I've come to know you over the years, and as much as some people may think that you do things with a knee-jerk reaction, I think many things that you do are thought out and laid out ahead of time. And I'm going to refer to the famous "Get Out of Town" speech, which for a while it was your moniker, and you had a lot of fun with, and boosted the career of one radio talk show host that I know of. How much of what happened that day at the quarterback club was a planned strategy to take some of the diversion off a team that had just had a tough loss against New Orleans Saints here in Buffalo, and how much of it was actual anger at what you thought maybe was unfair criticism?
I think about 99% and 1%. I said what I said incorrectly. I wish I had phrased it, obviously, a little bit better. What I did was borrow a phrase from that radio announcer, but no one realized that, when you saw the sound clip. So it's it's been an albatross around my neck ever since, or a moniker, as you say. But of course, like everything else, you learn to have fun with it. It's not serious enough to take seriously. But yes, I mean, my desire was clearly to make the point that a young team, if it was going to accomplish anything, could not be ripped 365 days a year and every day, and expect to achieve something. And unfortunately, that was what was happening. There was nothing that, despite the fact that we were fighting our way courageously through some serious injuries, notably to Cornelius and Shane, among others, there was no way that we were going to achieve anything in the long run if we were nitpicked to death on a daily basis. And I wanted to make that point.
1990, maybe looking back, if there's such a thing as fate, and when your number comes up, your number comes up. It looks like, up to this point, that was the year the Bills could have, maybe should have done it. The chemistry on the team, players reaching their peak. Certainly the drive to Super Bowl 25 was just things that legends are made out of, and you came up 1 point short. Looking back at the team, you've already said that's probably the year you're going to remember the most. What did that team have during that year that made it such a special year?
Well, this team that's been to 3 Super Bowls, actually a team that, because the bulk of it's been together for all 5 playoff years, this team has an incredible chemistry. It has a work ethic, a selflessness that you rarely see. I mean, this is the Boston Celtics, the Pittsburgh Steelers of yore. I know there'll be people who say, well, you haven't won any championships or any world championships, and that's true. But in terms of how they approach things, how they work, how they sacrifice, how they bleed red, white, and blue, how they feel for one another, how they sacrifice their own egos for the good of the team, this is definitely one of those very special teams. And that came to the fore. I think people began to realize it in '90, because don't forget, we opened the season, or perhaps it was the second game of the season, with a loss in Miami, a pretty tough loss. And the following week, there were commentaries on television. This team is dead. It's going nowhere. It's out of control. It has no discipline. It has no fiber. It has no leadership. Marv Levy's a nice man, but he can't coach. This team is headed for oblivion. It was headed for the Super Bowl.
and
the reason it was because of Marv Levy and his tremendous ability to keep these fellas focused, and their incredible belief in themselves and belief in their ability to win. And so I knew it was there. Marv knew it was there. The coaches knew it was there. To see it come blossoming out and to go all the way through that season as we did, and show the world what we were made of was just a wonderful, wonderful, proud experience. And of course we've had it since, because last year even was a was a very tough year. We had to come through as a wild card, and you'd wish that the ending had been different. I guess both for the team and me. But but there's a tremendous pride in being associated with these guys. I mean, it transcends. I don't have anything to do with it. It's and didn't really. It's Marv and the tremendous soul and character of this football team. They are unique individuals.
In the playoffs in 1990, you rolled over Miami, and no one will forget the trouncing of the Raiders here at Rich Stadium. Right. With what at the time many thought was a gimmick offense, the no-huddle offense, and you went in as big favorites over the Giants, a team you had beaten earlier at their place. It's Super Bowl 25, a game that many have referred to as the greatest Super Bowl ever played. What sticks out in your mind about that game, obviously the fact of the defeat?
All three Super Bowls kind of blur together, except for special little vignette moments. On the field before the game, the excitement was so palpable, the pride was so palpable. Of course, the national anthem with Whitney Houston and the war at the time was a very memorable moment. And of course, the comeback. This is a team that has come back and beaten the odds and beaten adversity so many times, including the following 2 years. It has such strength of character that I don't think there was anyone on our sideline that didn't believe that we were going to win that football game. And fate, just takes the ball a couple of feet wide. To me, it is the greatest Super Bowl ever, but it's also the signature of this team. They'll come back, boy. Don't leave early and don't ever quit on them. They're going to come back, and it doesn't matter how bad the loss. Don't forget, after that Super Bowl, everybody said the Bills' hearts will be broken. They'll never come back. They can't. No team can come back after this kind of heartbreak. We did twice, and Scotty Norwood did in spades.
And we'll talk about the two Super Bowls yet to come, Super Bowl 26 and Super Bowl 27, right after these messages right here on the Empire Sports Network. Back with Buffalo Bills' Bill Polian, and I know that's always going to be, speaking of monikers, one that you'll wear proudly. 1991, team comes back from a devastating one-point defeat in Super Bowl 25. And now you really do have a lot of injuries throughout the season. You have the loss of quarterback Jim Kelly late in the year. Bruce Smith is, even when he comes back, is less than whole. And you make it with a tough victory over Denver right here at Rich Stadium. It was really, you talk about adversity, the team went through a lot of adversity, and we bring you right up to the Washington Redskins in Super Bowl 26 in Minneapolis. I talked to you before that game. You said the team was very well prepared. Obviously, almost from the beginning, offensively, the bolts seem to have come off. What happened in that game?
Well, we had one of those games where the wheels did come off offensively. If our team had a flaw, or flaws, let me say plural, on the one hand, not having Bruce is not something you can overcome. I mean, you just can't. He's a unique player. On offense, there are other people to pick up the slack. I mean, you lose Jimmy, Frank steps in. Many people would argue that he's by far the best backup quarterback in football. Certainly he's among, the top 2 or 3. and the bigger the game, the better Frank performs. So, although it isn't Jim, there are other people who step in. Thurman can carry the ball more. Andre will do this. Somebody else will perform. But losing Bruce simply was too much of a handicap for the defense to overcome. That's because of the nature of the position. We started out long ago in this show talking about who's the key guy to make you become a contender. Well, there are two. They're the quarterback and the pass rush men. And if you lose Bruce, there's no adequate replacement. So we were flawed in that sense. The other flaw I think that we had is that our offense was based very much on tempo and rhythm. And when people could take us out of our rhythm, we had problems moving the football. And then, as Marv often said, once we went 3 and out off the field very quickly, we were putting a weakened, admittedly already weakened defense back on without much rest. That was always the fear of the no huddle, and it's valid, no question about it. The fear is that you don't click, you get off, and you expose your defense to long periods of time on the field, particularly against a strong ball control team like the Redskins, who were having their year. Like you said about us in 1990. There's no question that 91 was the Redskins' year, and I think 92 was the Cowboys' year. That's not to denigrate them. They were great champions and very deserving. So we were flawed going into the game with the loss of Bruce, and he tried to play, but I mean, he wasn't Bruce, as we all knew. And then when the offense couldn't get clicking, it became a snowball rolling downhill, and we did come back. At the end of the half, got the bad call, that took us out of a score there, and then got the ball moving a little bit in the second half and got the rhythm going, but then we couldn't sustain it defensively, unfortunately.
1992, a season that some fans would look upon as a hot and cold year, and at times the team looked very average, and then 2 weeks later they looked like world beaters. But I think the biggest game, as people look back in years to come, the 92 season it has to be the greatest comeback ever against the Houston Oilers, which of course here in Buffalo will overshadow the Super Bowl. But you look back at that, we talked during the break about sometimes you make statements and they lose their meaning because they're just the vastness of the words. To be down by the margin that this team was down, to come back with Frank Reich in a backup role, with Thurman Thomas out of the game,
Cornelius Bennett out of the game.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's simply, words can't describe the magnitude of that comeback. And I know after that game, you had to be as proud as you ever were to be associated with this franchise.
Oh, no question. I mean, I fill up when I think about how proud I am to have had the opportunity to be around these guys. I mean, it's unique. It's marvelous. My children have had the opportunity to be around them. They've been great, wonderful role models. Couldn't have had better people to model themselves after than Frank Reich and Andre and people of that nature, Kent Hull and Pete Metzelaars and Mark Kelso. And it was sort of a little bit of the icing on the cake, the final evidence that this team had such a unique heart and such a unique character. And as I've said many times, they are unique individuals. They are far more than the sum of their parts, although their parts are excellent, and the reason they're far more is Marv Levy.
The Super Bowl against the Dallas Cowboys started out tremendous. It looked as though in that first quarter things had gone your way. As we all know now, the bottom fell out in the second half. So looking back, where will this team that is still going, but as people watch this in perhaps years to come, where will the Buffalo Bills during your tenure, where will they be remembered in the annals of football? I mean, you can look at the number of games won over the course of the years, and most ever, 3 consecutive Super Bowls. Where do you think, as a football man, will this team be remembered?
Well, I think, first of all, that the final chapter has not been written very clearly. If this team can go back sometime in the near future and win a Super Bowl, then I think it ranks among the top teams of all time. And I'm talking about the Steelers, the 72 Dolphins, I think certain of the Cowboy teams. It'll rank right up there as some of the greatest of all time. And I pray that the outstanding players on this team get their just due when it comes to the Hall of Fame. If if we're not, maybe the last time I use we, able to go on and win that final elusive world championship, then I think it will rank, unfortunately, in the second echelon with the over-the-hill gang Redskins and the Minnesota Vikings as sort of among the top 10 teams of all time, but maybe not right up there with the 49ers, who I failed to mention before, and those others. The thing that I pray for most is that when it comes to the Hall of Fame, that the selectors will not be biased, that they'll be honest and look at the records of these performances. I was asked by a reporter from the New York Daily News in Los Angeles before the Super Bowl, did I think Jim Kelly belonged in the Hall of Fame? And I said, why do you ask the question? And he said, well, he hasn't won a Super Bowl. I said, has Dan Marino? Has John Elway? Don't you think those are Hall of Famers? And he said, yes, they are. And I said, well, then why isn't Jim? He said, well, I hadn't thought of it in that vein. I pray that people think of it in that vein, and so that Jim Kelly and well, James Lofton, I think, is a shoo-in, but Thurman Thomas and Cornelius Bennett and Bruce Smith and Andre Reed can go where they deserve to go, which is and Ken Hull, I think, to Canton.
We will be back to say goodnight right after these final messages. We're all out of time, but I have one final question for Bill, and I think I already know the answer. Always be a Buffalo Bills fan?
Well, I think the answer is certainly yes. There'll come a time, I guess, when if I'm fortunate enough to get back in the league, I may have to go against the Bills. But the happiest time of our life, certainly the happiest time of my career has been spent here, and there'll be nothing but happy memories for this time and this team. Yeah, I'm a Bill.
Congratulations. You did a great job. You did a great job.
I'm so happy for you.
Jeez, I'm happy for everybody.